Welcome to APH's webinar called Strategies and Resources for the Instruction and Evaluation of Tactile Graphicacy Skills. This is the third in a series of 4 in which we walk alongside you as we journey through the foundations of tactile literacy. Now, I'm happy to pass things over to our skilled presenters.
Good afternoon. My name is Jenny Wheeler, and I am the Regional Outreach Specialist for the Southwest, and this includes Arizona, California, Colorado, Nevada, New Mexico, and Utah. I'm also a certified TVI and O&M specialist, and I have been a Braille transcriber for 20 years, and I love the subject of tactile graphics.
Hello, my name is Karen Poppe, and I'm the Braille and Tactile Literacy Product Manager in the New Product Development Department at the American Printing House, and I've been working at APH since the mid-1980s and have focused most of my efforts on the physical design and development of products that help support early tactile literacy and tactile graphic use within the classroom, as well as in creating tools such as tactile slates and textured materials that teachers and Braille transcribers can use to design tactile graphics for their students. Many of these tools can also be used by students to create their own graphics, and I will be sharing some of these products with you today during this webinar. So welcome and thank you for attending.
We are so thrilled to have this opportunity to join you today to talk about tactile graphics learning. Our objectives for today are, we hope that we'll all be able to describe a variety of instructional strategies that we can use for effective tactile graphics teaching. And also, we're going to explore methods of tactile graphics creation that will give our students a better understanding and more tactile perceptual capability. Also, we'll go through an overview of available resources and tools for tactile graphics learning so that we'll all be able to evaluate our students' tactile perceptual capability and then identify new areas for development and progression. We have on this slide some resources that we hope will be helpful for you in teaching tactile literacy, but we will have a much more complete list for you that we'll share after our presentation. Our first topic today is Braille literacy and tactile graphicacy and the connections between them. As you know, Braille literacy is the ability to access and comprehend and produce symbolic language through touch. It does require some pretty refined skills, including fine motor sensitivity and dexterity, the ability to use a lot of carefully constructed knowledge and a variety of tactile cognitive strategies. I wanted to take a few moments to talk about the difference between tactile and tactual. These words are often used interchangeably, and I think that if you use one rather than the other in any situation, then people will know what you're talking about. But there are some really interesting differences between them. Tactile is a word that describes a thing that can be touched, as in tactile graphic or tactile map or tactile system. It is a static concept. So in other words, tactile objects or surfaces or materials don't engage. They have to be acted upon by someone like you or like me. And this leads us to tactual, which is a word that describes the physical sensation of touch. By definition, it is more abstract and conceptual, and it involves all parts of the body that experience touch and perception and discrimination. It is, instead of tactile, a dynamic concept. The tactual sense is the acting agent that engages the power of tactile objects. There are some great characteristics of wonderful Braille readers, I think, that are relevant to our talking about tactile graphicacy. They have intense curiosity for exploring and discovering with the hands. Also, a great ability to perceive and decode and use tactile information. They can capably track across lines of text, but they can also find text in many different situations. And as much as possible, they use systematic movements with both of their hands and multiple fingers on each hand. They use their understanding of how a book works to gain information and knowledge and then use it effectively. They have a left to right and top to bottom progression, so they know what to look for on a page. They can preview and anticipate information, and they can also return to and review information later when they need it. There are a lot of similarities between tactile graphicacy and Braille literacy. Tactile graphicacy is the ability to access and comprehend and produce, this time, tactile graphics or raised line drawings, and it requires a lot of the same skills. But we could possibly call tactile graphicacy an advanced form of Braille literacy, or enhanced, and it's not inherent for our Braille readers. It does require explicit attention and education on our part and a careful building up of their skills so that they're able to perceive that there are different kinds of symbolic information on a page that have different kinds of meaning and distinguish between different tactile surfaces and draw meaning from them. In other words, understand that a line is different from the Braille, and a curve is different from a line, and a shape is different from a curve, and all of these things have different meanings. So why tactile graphics? There are a lot of reasons to provide beautiful and varied tactile graphics to our students. And the first among these is that children love pictures and symbols. They're a place where their natural creativity and imagination can be used and developed. It gives them a focus for their attention and their perception. It helps them to have conversations and develop their social skills. It invites their curiosity and motivates their active engagement. Pictures also help them to build confidence. They learn what they're able to do. They build cognitive pathways to retain and memorize information. And while they're looking at pictures, they will be developing more sensitive fine motor skills and finger strength and exploration techniques. Another great benefit of graphicacy skills is that pictures help children to understand text better. Pictures actually clarify and reinforce text content using symbolic representation. This includes the setting and the plot and the characters and their dialogue and their different viewpoints and the conflicts that they have and their resolutions. As you know, stories are often told in pictures long before they're told in text. Academically, pictures also help students to organize verbal information and build mental scaffolds because stories are more concentrated and concrete and coherent and comprehensible when there are pictures that go with them. They enhance children's language and literacy and social development because they help children learn to use symbols to tell their own stories. Now, the part that I know we've all been waiting for, which is systematic instruction, the principles behind it, and the techniques and the strategies that you can use to effectively teach tactile graphics to your students. First, the guiding principles. Number one among these is that all of our students need to receive a lot of tactile graphics instruction, beginning in the early elementary grades and extending through the secondary grades. With this specialized training, even our very young children can learn to comprehend and enjoy and problem solve with tactile graphics. As with everything that we do, individualization is critical, but it's reassuring to know that there are some effective teaching patterns and techniques and basic skills that are universal, and that's what we'll be talking about next. Where do we start with graphics learning? Well, one of the most exciting parts about graphics instruction is that it's an ongoing process. So it's never exactly begun or complete. You can't really say where graphics learning starts, and there's always something new to learn. So create a plan for each of your students that makes graphics learning a consistent and everyday part of their educational experience. As you're already aware, tactile graphics appear in student texts and worksheets and assignments pretty early on, even as early as kindergarten. If our older students come to us needing special assistance to catch up because there are graphic gaps in their graphics education, that's okay. At any age, systematic graphics learning begins with awareness and perception and development of these exploration techniques that we'll discuss. It doesn't matter what age or developmental stage they're at. The key to success for all of our students is to teach them to find joy in discovering and problem solving. This is something they'll come naturally by if we'll just guide them to it. A few helpful differences to keep in mind between tactual and visual learning. Visual learning is a matter of simultaneous perception. In other words, the eyes give detailed information and an overall impression, a big picture, all at once. But tactual learning is a matter of sequential perception. And in this kind of learning, which is very valuable and very different, things must be explored a piece at a time, and then the pieces fit together. Because of this, a tactual learner is typically going to experience the world in 3 dimensions rather than 2. So if an object needs to be explored, then it can be enclosed in the hands, which gives a view of the front and the back and all of the sides and the parts of it. And the complete exploration will bring a whole picture. If something can't be held in the hands, if it's something larger, then it must be turned or walked around and parts examined one at a time until a whole picture is obtained, and perhaps many questions will need to be asked. So when three-dimensional objects are rendered in a two-dimensional format, they are not the same for our tactual readers, and they're not automatically or easily recognized. They have to take their three-dimensional experiences and transfer them mentally onto a flat surface. And the meaning of all of the lines and curves and shapes and symbols are going to have to be learned and then related to those three-dimensional real experiences. As an example, I have on this slide 3 different pictures. The first picture shows a real caterpillar that a child is holding, and the caterpillar is pretty large. And so it's stretched across 2 of the child's fingers, 1 on each hand. The other 2 pictures are tactile representations of the caterpillar. The first of these shows a textured collage that looks like maybe some thin plastic and a piece of felt and maybe a little bit of string to represent a caterpillar that is crawling on grass. And then the other of the pictures shows a black and white image that could also be a raised line drawing of a caterpillar. The second and the third pictures look nothing tactually like the real caterpillar, as you might imagine. However, the child can learn symbolically, pretend imaginatively that these are also kinds of caterpillars, that they show up in books. And by comparing them to the real experience, the child can learn to tell stories through the use of these symbols, to call them caterpillars when they encounter them in the books. Touch relies on memory skills and concentration, perhaps much more than vision does. So if the concentration fails during exploration, or parts are put mentally together in the wrong order, then the final picture might be distorted. And this is okay, especially in the beginning, because the brain's capacity in tactual library grows with time. So it's okay to slow down, take your time, look at things many times and in different ways with students. It's a labor-intensive process, especially in the beginning, and it should be a joyful process. And it is okay if it takes some time. I think it's also very reassuring to remember that even though they'll be encountering new types of information, they all require a pretty similar approach. And greater speed and ability will come with a mental assembly of many experiences. The mechanics of tactile graphics reading are very similar to the mechanics of Braille reading. We want our students using as much as possible both hands and multiple fingers on each hand. As they grow and develop their skills, as they master them, they should be allowed to make choices about what they do with their hands. For example, one hand can examine details in a graphic, or one hand can look at a graphic while another hand returns to the Braille text to find the related information. As much as possible, though, in the beginning, we do want them to learn full engagement with the use of both of their hands and lots of their fingers. If they'll do this, they will develop a variety of exploratory procedures and movements and search techniques and strategies, which we will talk about next. I have here a list of movements and search techniques, and these are not in any particular order. They don't advance from least to most. It's just a list of things that our students ought to learn and some things that you might even see them doing in the beginning when they're learning tactile graphics reading. The first of these is contour following, which is where you trace an edge or an outer boundary of a shape in order to get a sense of its whole. The next is enclosure of the global shape. It's the use of the whole hand, molding the palm and the pads of the fingers to the outer boundaries of the entire shape, and in this way enclosing it within the hand. Similar to this is enclosure of local shapes, where you look at a small part of a graphic, molding the tips of the fingers instead of the whole hand to the boundaries of part of a shape or tactile pattern. Then there's the pinch procedure. This helps you to look at very fine details in a graphic. You hold the edge of a shape or a tactile pattern in a pincer grip between the thumb and one or more fingers. Surface sweeping is probably something that you'll see very young children doing, or students who are first being introduced to tactile graphics. This is movement of the fingers or the palm over an image's surface. And even though it doesn't give very detailed information, it does give some information and can be useful. Static contact is stationary contact with an image's surface. And this gives very little information because the hand and fingers do have to be moving in order to gain that information. But it can be a useful place for students to rest while they're thinking or problem solving so that they still maintain contact with the graphic. And finally, there are symmetrical movements. These are symmetrical finger displacements around a tactile pattern or a shape using both hands. This is not an exhaustive list, but it is a great place to start. I also have 4 exploration strategies that I'll outline for you. And once again, this is not a complete list, but it is also a great place for a beginning. The grid pattern is probably the most systematic of all of our strategies. These are systematic horizontal and vertical movements to locate all elements in the graphic. So you start at the top left, and then you move to the right, you come back to the left, you drop down, you move to the right, you come back to the left and drop down again. What this allows you to do is to see everything that's on the page. As you know, there's often a lot of information, a lot of diverse information, and this helps you to find all of it before you actually start to examine it and figure it out. Then there's the perimeter strategy. With this, you follow the outer boundaries or outlines of the graphic, and you are identifying main elements based on their shapes or other characteristics. It helps you to organize a mental concept according to the whole before you actually look at the parts of the graphic and get the details. Then there's the cyclic strategy. With this, you identify a starting position inside the graphic or on one of its outer boundaries. And then you use cyclic patterns to move outward. And you look through a series of elements, and then you return to the starting position. If you do this, then you can memorize the relative location of different elements to each other and also to the starting point. The reference point is the fourth of these, and it is probably the most advanced and comprehensive of all of the strategies. Here, you identify an easy-to-locate reference point based on some outstanding graphic characteristic or position. And you look at different elements of the graphic that are located around that reference point, and you can even build more reference points as you go. If you do this, then you can understand the relationship between the graphical elements using the reference point and build a full mental image of the graphic. Now, students might use all four of these strategies in a graphic, or they might only use one, or they might use a combination of them. It depends on the demands of the graphic and how complicated it is, and they should be able to choose the best one or the best series of strategies. Now, let's talk about some key elements of graphics learning, some things that our students need to learn to be able to do. The first and probably most important of all of these is to develop a decision-making and mental graphic concept. First, they need to be able to ask guided, problem-solving questions. What am I looking at? And what am I looking for? And then what exploration strategies or search techniques will be best in this particular situation so that they can put together an entire picture, one group or group of areas at a time. It's also very important to help them understand that everything in a graphic has a symbolic purpose, that there are lots and lots of different types of tactile surfaces. There are straight lines, there are curves and waves and zigzags. There are patterns that are solid or dotted or dashed, and also patterns that are circular and semicircular and spiral. And this might seem obvious, but it is actually a very important matter that our students learn that each one of these has a different symbolic purpose and can be used to understand the graphic. Included in these are the point symbols and the area textures and the shapes that have corners and the shapes that don't have corners and the arrows and lead lines and directional symbols. Labels are a really important part of tactile graphics. They provide explicit meanings for symbolic points and lines and textures and shapes and patterns. However, it is not always easy to identify what labels correspond to because sometimes there's just not enough room in the graphic to fully use a label properly. Sometimes they're quite far from the elements that they're connected to. Sometimes they're connected with lead lines or arrows. Sometimes there are too many things there for the label to be easily identified with its parts. So help your students use the context clues. Once again, like a puzzle, exploration strategies to attach labels to graphic elements, and most importantly, comprehend their intent. One of the things that I'm sure you've noticed is that tactile graphics rarely look exactly like their print counterparts. And this is because there's usually too much information in the print to represent fully in the tactile graphic. So instead, we have to use simpler features and symbols to represent the whole. As much as you can, link the graphic representations to a child's real experiences, like we saw with the pictures of the caterpillar. Pair your verbal explanations and cues and descriptive words with independent or semi-independent exploration, because our students will be more active if they have to search for and identify and interpret the graphic elements than if we are telling them where they are and what they are. We talked about reference points a little bit before, and they can be used in a larger strategy, but also in smaller strategies. These are anchor or fixed points in a graphic, and they make orientation a lot easier. They provide students with a place to start and also a place to return to just in case they get lost or need some help. One of the most important parts of graphics learning actually doesn't have very much to do with the graphics at all. It's the context and the content. It's the information that comes before and after a graphic to understand its context and its whole and its parts. If there are gaps in content understanding, there are going to be gaps in graphics understanding. So teach students how to use titles and headings and related text and captions and graphic descriptions and keys, and especially those transcribers' notes, and also the comprehension questions. Then explain the parts of the graphic as they relate to the text information and use the comprehension questions to guide the exploration. Also, be sure to spend time with your student understanding content before going to the graphic to locate the information, and identify purpose and use of the graphic from the content. What is it for? Help your students to learn to write down or verbalize information that's needed to solve a problem or answer a question. And then teach them to focus specifically on features in the graphic that increase text understanding rather than distract from it, because that is the purpose of the graphic. Coordinate graphs are a little bit different and require some special attention. Fortunately, they're very similar. So if a student has coordinate graph skills, then these can be generalized across many different coordinate graphs, but they're very important because they show up a lot, especially in math. So students need to understand graph boundaries. They need to understand the axes and also the labels and scales that are common for these kinds of graphs. Be able to trace the graph lines or curves from beginning to end and identify their direction, and then locate the points and identify exactly what they mean and how they relate to the rest of the graphic. Finally, help them to locate and use graphic keys. These are extremely important because they provide so much information and context about the graphic. These are symbolic representations of words and phrases and concepts. They can be textual, using 1 or 2 or even 3 Braille symbols to represent a word or an idea. Or they can be pictorial, so they might use a shape like a star or a circle or a triangle to represent something. Teach them to read the whole key first. This is really important, not for the sake of memorization, but to understand what's in the graphic before they get to it. Then be able to distinguish between key labels and other graphic elements, because unfortunately, line paths and point symbols and textures and areas can often look very similar to the graphic symbols, either Braille or pictorial. Teach them to shift between a graphic and a key. This is a little bit easier if the graphic and the key are on the same page or even facing pages, but they aren't always. And so they need to be able to go back and forth between them so they compare the graphic labels or the symbols to the key. Now, everything that we've talked about up until this point can be a wonderful starting place for goals and for educational plans surrounding tactile graphics. But let's go ahead and talk for a moment specifically about goals and evaluation. Many of these principles are the same as what you use in other goal setting. However, use a special attention for tactile graphics when you go through this process. Identify that target skill or group of skills that needs attention based on your students' pacing. And talk with your classroom teachers about their grade level expectations and what adjustments might need to be made, but do write goals that have reference to classroom activities and needs. And as much as you can, be proactive. Teach the skills ahead of time so that students are not encountering new graphics when they have to perform with them, like in a test situation, for example. Try and give them lots of practice ahead of time so that if at all possible, they can generalize those skills when they need to. Be systematic in your evaluation and have a consistent, easy to follow procedure for your student assessment that includes an element of assessment in every lesson. And then obviously, adjust your future lesson plans based on student progress. Look for areas of need for additional practice and also splinter skills that might come up. Your evaluation should guide your educational planning, as in everything that you do. So assess before and during and after your instruction. And consult with your team often through this process, especially your parents. Describe to them the successes and the challenges that you're having and ask for their advice. And then when they give you feedback, then report back to them and keep your lines of communication open. This should be a wonderful partnership and an ongoing part of the student's entire educational experience. If you have older students who come to you lacking graphic skills, then start by identifying the gaps in their tactile graphics learning and how these relate to all the other parts of their educational experience. And just as with your young students, begin with awareness and perception and ability to use systematic exploration strategies, but also use, even more importantly, the grade level content to drive the plan development and address the gaps. I have here some questions that you can ask that will help to drive your graphics evaluation and your educational planning. Does your student have the mechanics necessary to sufficiently explore and interpret all parts of a graphic? Is your student able to verbalize and enact the steps in a systematic search for information? Can your student ignore the clutter in the graphic and find its important information? Does your student have a clear and organized decision-making process? When your student reaches a mental or physical barrier, can they think through and solve the problems? Can your student relate information in the text or related questions to the graphic? And finally, is your student comprehending the text content sufficiently to be able to use the graphic as required? If the answer to any of these questions is no, this is a wonderful place to start your graphics instruction with your student. This brings us to a very special part of our presentation, which is our interview with Dan and Stephanie French from Arizona Schools for the Deaf and Blind, with their perspectives on tactile graphics learning. Good afternoon, friends. I am so excited to introduce Dan and Stephanie French to you, and I'm so happy that they have agreed to join us today. Stephanie is a wonderful teacher at Arizona Schools for the Deaf and Blind in Phoenix. She is both a certified teacher of students with visual impairments and also a certified orientation and mobility specialist. And Dan is an excellent Braille transcriber, also at Arizona Schools for the Deaf and Blind. Dan and Stephanie, welcome. I'm so happy that you're here with us today. Dan, my first question is for you. What were your first experiences with tactile graphics?
First was the screen board with my mobility instructor, as well as it was an APH product with the tongs and the tinfoil for making maps.
Dan, was there formal instruction in using tactile graphics, or did you develop your own personal knowledge?
A little bit of both. My mobility instructor showed me some, and then I just started going on my own from that.
Dan, probably my favorite question to ask is this. Are there any tactile graphics that you find especially useful or interesting or fun?
I like the map making kit, the tactile, let's see. Where'd they go? The picture maker, basically because it's cheap. You don't have to keep buying new products for it, and you can keep adjusting the maps.
And how about the opposite? Are there any kinds of tactile graphics that you find especially challenging? And what do you think makes them so difficult to use?
I've just gotten introduced to the Tiger, and it looks like I can edit some of it, but I cannot produce it. So just editing some of the stuff.
Dan, thank you so much for all of your insightful comments. I have a question for both of you now. As you know, there are a lot of ways that people use to produce and present tactile graphics. And these might include embossed hard copy, or swell form, or thermoform, or even electronic Braille display. Is there a method that you prefer for tactile graphics presentation? And if so, what do you think makes it especially accessible and enjoyable for you or your students to use?
Again, I like the picture maker, just because if it's not right, you can change it really easily. And there's so many choices on what you can do with it.
Have anything else?
Not that I can see.
Okay. And mine was, it just kind of depends on what the materials are that need to be presented for the graphic, like their purpose. And whether I or the student is making it, or whether, yeah, basically who's responsible for making it. So the embossed Braille with the electronic embossed is beneficial because that's how some of the tests are done. So it's getting them familiar with that format. But I also just use basic tactile graphics with their Brailler, because that way it's motivating for them and it's immediate and they can do it. As far as, I do a lot of picture maker when I have to simplify graphics that are on computer tests, but I have to represent for the students. So I do the picture maker a lot with that. But my students like to use the tactile doodle if they actually have to make raised drawings. And I prefer that over like swell paper because it's, or the quick draw, because it's easier to do more fine details with the tactile doodle. And the benefit, I haven't used it in this way, but you can put it directly on a picture and do the shape of the drawing based off of the print picture immediately. For those of us like me who am not very good with artistic things, that's a good thing to have. Hopefully that answers that question.
Stephanie and Dan, I have another question for both of you. We're also excited about the new APH Monarch that's coming out soon. And as you know, it has 10 lines of refreshable Braille, but this space can also be used for electronic tactile graphics presentation. And users will have the ability to zoom in and out on the tactile graphics and explore some of the smaller details. What difference do you think that this will make for students who are learning how to read tactile graphics, and also adults who use them in their daily and professional lives?
I think it's going to help a lot. Just to make it easier to make the pictures and easier to read them. So I could see it being very helpful.
Or even just the fact that it's more technology related sometimes will motivate the students, and more immediate, in theory, response or access will also help motivate them to use it.
Dan and Stephanie, another question. When you're creating tactile graphics for yourself or for your students, what tools and materials do you like to use?
Long time ago, it was the screen board. Then it was the that tactile map kit. Now it's the picture maker. Like I said, it's easy. It's a cheap way to do it, and easy to fix if you make a mistake. On the Brailler, the first thing I ever did on the Brailler was the Christmas trees, making them. And those were kind of fun. Students were always impressed when you could come out with one of those.
If I am creating it for the students, then the picture maker is probably what I use the most, or creating some basic things like Christmas tree, or a version of a present, or a baby bottle as part of like a card or something to give to like a school staff for special occasion. I've done with the Braille writer. I like the electronic, trying to do the embossed electronically. It's just not something I have the time or patience for right now, but in the long run, I'd like to do more.
Stephanie, as a teacher, what challenges do you face in guiding your students to learn to read and use tactile graphics? And how do you overcome these challenges?
Some of it has to do with the quality of the tactile graphics that they have. Some of what they're exposed to especially at an earlier age, all they really get out of it is, ooh, this is cool, and then their attention is gone. So some of it is the quality of the graphics and also their attention. Just exposing them to those graphics more or for longer, or for the little ones, I try to give them time at the beginning for them to just explore it on their own a little bit before I start describing it, or try to have them do it in a explore it in a systematic way. For the younger ones, when they first find it, that it's a big hand movement over the whole thing, and then gradually seeing if I can get them to use their fingers more to explore it. But probably just the quality and the attention.
I have just 2 more questions. Dan, what advice would you give to children and adults who are learning how to access and read tactile graphics?
Have patience with it. It doesn't always work the best the first time. You'll have to readjust things. And especially, that's why I like the picture maker, because you can, again, it's cheap. You're not using up materials with mistakes. And just keep working at it till you end up with what you need.
And Stephanie, what advice would you give to other teachers who are teaching their students about tactile graphics?
Main thing would be just exposing them is where they need to start. Somewhere along the line, I've heard or read where students first need to understand, obviously, real concepts. So the real item, then switching to like solid kind of swell form items. So for my younger ones, sometimes I have them use the flip over charts. So they see a solid raised kind of thermoform style, basic shapes and pictures. And then I've gone from there to like the outlined and filled in pictures for like the touch and tell series. And then eventually switching them and exposing them more to the outline of the pictures. I don't know if that's necessarily the most ideal, but I did read it or hear it somewhere once upon a time.
Well, that's all the questions that I have today. But Dan and Stephanie, I just want to thank you so much for joining us today. It's really been a privilege talking with you about your perspectives and your experiences with tactile graphics. And I look forward to the next opportunity that we'll have to learn from you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so at this time, we want to continue our focus to actual products and tools that are available for supporting graphic literacy. So keep in mind as we review the next few slides that all of the materials shown can be complemented and expanded by materials that you create on your own for your students. The showcase tools and materials will dovetail with needed tactile literacy skills referenced in the tactile skills progression shared with you today. So let's get started with exploration of real objects. As you know, tactile graphic literacy does not begin with direct use of tactile displays. The first essential step to tactile understanding is a young child's early hands-on experiences with real objects within functional and purposeful context. For example, have the child sort and compare objects by size, shape, and texture. A rich foundation of basic concepts garnered from hands-on experiences with real objects is key for later tactile graphic success. So the first photo on this slide shows an assortment of real objects. These are real objects included in APH's Setting the Stage for Tactile Understanding and represent common objects within a child's environment that they can use to compare to similar objects at home. The second photo shows a young tactile reader actively exploring a real ball, using both hands together and tracing the contour of the ball and noticing other properties related to texture, weight, and shape. Symbolic understanding. Part of tactile literacy is understanding the real objects in our world can be represented by a picture, a drawing, or a model. Although a tactile illustration represents something real in our world, a tactile graphic cannot fully capture the entire essence of an object or all of its characteristics. Usually something is forfeited or altered due to changes in scale, simplification of the graphic, or a perspective change. A gradual systematic transition from real objects to raised line graphics is necessary and should be intentionally taught starting at a young age. So here's an example from Setting the Stage that navigates a child from a real toothbrush to a molded image of a toothbrush that retains the identifying and salient characteristics of the handle and bristles, and then to a raised outline drawing of a toothbrush. As a sneak preview, a raised dot presentation of the toothbrush is shown as it would be tactually experienced on the Monarch device. Transitioning from 3D to 2D representations mirrors the shift from concrete experiences with real objects to abstract tactile line drawings or renderings. Here we have a photo of a real apple that sighted students can instantly recognize at a quick glance. Visual learners have the ability to recognize a picture of an apple regardless of the angle or perspective, whether it's drawn as a black outline or as a solid silhouette. However, a tactile reader requires practice and exposure to varied tactile presentations of a given object. Keep in mind that tactile drawings of real objects are rarely recognized without the support of surrounding context and Braille labels. A tactile reader should be encouraged to feel the real apple in combination with a tactile rendering. Here, a stencil of an apple used to create a tactile raised line drawing of an apple on tactile drawing film. A student might also experience an apple within a storybook or tactile book such as APH's Flip Over Parts of a Whole. APH's giant textured beads with pattern matching cards can be used to navigate a student from 3D real objects to 2D representations. First, they can exercise their fine motor skills and hand skills by performing some bead stringing tasks and handling the large beads that differ in shape and texture, as well as color for students who are dual readers. The tactile pattern matching cards take the student on a journey from tactile cards that capture all the identifying characteristics of beads, keeping size and texture and shape constant. The intermediate stage is using the platform cards that merely show the overall shape of each bead minus the texture. And the last most challenging tactile presentations are 3D view cards that show simple raised line versions of the beads from an oblique angle with or without hidden lines. The latter representations are more comparable to tactile images that students will encounter in textbooks and on test. Consider jumpstarting a student's understanding of why a cube is depicted as a raised line square or why a sphere is represented as a simple raised line circle by having them wrap WikiStick around the actual cube or ball and removing the formed outline shape and placing it on a flat surface as shown in the photo on this slide. Shape recognition. Tactile graphic displays are littered with shapes of all types and sizes. It's vital that students have opportunities to learn to identify and discriminate various shapes through tactile activities, puzzles, and worksheets. You might focus on a circle, for example, and ask the student what types of objects a raised line circle could represent. Some of their responses might be a cookie, a button, a wheel, a bracelet, or a coin. Photos on this slide include APH's Match It Up frame mounted on the all-in-one board that allows the tactile reader to match raised shapes with their outline equivalents. A tactile worksheet from Tactile Treasures can be used to practice shape recognition, and the Textured Sorting Circles and Shapes kit offers many magnetic shapes and different textures for sorting and classifying, as well as for constructing complex graphics like Venn diagrams. Tactile puzzles are also a fun, interactive way of inserting raised shapes within a surrounding puzzle frame with a contrasting texture. Texture discrimination. Textures are very common features in tactile graphic displays, and therefore a young student should be exposed to a variety of intersecting and interesting textures and learn to discriminate between them. Common textures and patterns utilized in maps and graphs and other tactile displays include bumpy, wavy, rough, striped, and soft. And don't forget that smooth is a texture as well. Here are some examples of activities and products that can help hone texture discrimination skills. Texture matching cards constructed with interesting textures can be paired with a match-it-up frame mounted on an all-in-one board. The matching cards can be moved around independently by the student. The flip-over concept book textures also allows the student to match adjacent panels that display the same texture. Understanding spatial concepts. Interpreting and finding meaning in tactile graphics will demand that the student have a broad understanding of spatial concepts. Some of these concepts include above, below, between, next to, beside, and across from. Some interactive platforms, as well as some tactile worksheets, can be used to practice these basic concepts and assess the student's understanding. For example, you can use APH's Picture Maker board to illustrate and assess many of these concepts. The first photo shows the interactive shapes included with the Picture Maker, and that can be used to illustrate a variety of concepts such as triangle inside or outside a square, a circle above or below a triangle, and more rectangles below a raised bar. The center photo shows tactile townhouses surrounding a lake to illustrate compass rose directions. And the last photo shows a tactile worksheet from Tactile Treasures that tests the positional concept of around. Understanding perspective is one of the most daunting concepts to understand when learning to read and interpret tactile graphics. Students need to understand perspectives such as top or aerial view, front view, side view, and cross-sectional view. Sometimes how something is drawn can be tainted by one's visual experience. For example, it's commonplace for those with sight to draw a cup from a side view, but keep in mind that a tactile reader's experience of a cup might differ greatly. A cup might be better tactually recognized by the circular opening or rim of the cup than by a side view of the cup as shown here. The tactile 3D house included in setting the stage can be used to teach perspectives of front, side, and top views. APH also offers stack-ups that allow students to pair 3D stacked cube arrangements with 2D tactile counterparts and review various perspectives. A top view of a room layout, such as a table and chair arrangement, can be rebuilt using 3D models or demonstrated in combination with real chairs and a table. Line tracking and scanning techniques. Tactile learners need to be confident and consistent in their scanning approaches to exploring tactile graphics. Initial scanning of the whole graphic page will allow a student to anticipate what type of graphic is shown, a map or a graph, and how much of the page is utilized. Initially, explore the graphic in a global fashion, then search the pages in an organized manner, focusing on the details. The type of graphic will often dictate the best scanning approach, top to bottom, left to right, or outside to inside, or maintaining a reference point with one finger to avoid endlessly retracing the same shape. Line tracking exercises are also important. Students need to be exposed not only to different types of tactile lines, solid, dashed, and dotted, but also to different types of line paths, curved, straight, overlapping, intersecting, stair-step, and zigzag. Examples of some helpful tools include flip-over concept books, line paths, or creating tactile mazes on the Picture Maker board. Encourage the student to follow a path from a starting location, for example, a circle, to a destination represented by a discernible ending location, for example, an X shape. Familiarity with tactile terminology. The four main ingredients in tactile graphics include line paths, point symbols, textures or aerial patterns, and Braille labels. Line paths might represent rivers on a map, state boundary lines, or grid lines on a graph. Point symbols are those tactile elements that fit comfortably under a fingertip and can represent a landmark on a map or a data point on a line graph. Textures are frequently employed for water area or filled-in areas of a pie chart. Rarely are graphics void of identifying Braille labels. Labels make graphics meaningful. Students need to learn these common tactile terms to help them negotiate a tactile graphic, especially as they learn to use tactile keys and legends. Experience with tactile graphic methods. In recent years, there has been a proliferation of different types of tactile methods and media. We cannot always control what type of tactile medium will be used to prepare a graphic for a student. So a student should have exposure to as many different types of tactile methods as possible. Some of these include embossed paper, microcapsule paper, thermoform graphics, thermography, or raised line or raised ink methods, collage graphics, Braille embosser dot graphics, and even 3D printed images and models. Reading graphs and charts. As a tactile reader progresses in their schooling, the types of tactile graphics become more sophisticated and a means for receiving the same information as their sighted classmates. They will be expected to interpret graphs and charts as they complete homework assignments and take standardized tests. Interpreting tactile graphs and charts will exercise all those skills the student acquired earlier. Increasing complexity of graphics can lead to waning interest or frustration with them. So it's important to continue to frequently expose tactile readers to as many graphics as possible and give them lots of practice interpreting them. Reading maps. Tactile maps are among the most common types of graphics that students will encounter. This could be in the form of ready-made tactile graphic or an interactive platform for O&M purposes such as picture maker or a tactile town layout. Reading and using tactile maps leads to independent travel. Interpreting keys and legends. Experienced tactile readers will be able to work between a graphic and a key or legend that helps identify all important tactile elements used within the graphic. This will demand that the tactile reader understand the difference between lines, textures, and point symbols. APH's tactile human skeleton poster allows the student to label the bones of the body using a key. One of the photos on this slide shows a young student actively working between a collage map of California and a corresponding tactile key that gives meaning to the textures and point symbols used within the map. Next, we are going to review some tools and materials that students can use to create and embellish their own tactile graphics. Tactile literacy is not only about being able to read and interpret tactile graphics, but it also involves a student being able to independently create tactile graphics. We want to cultivate a love of tactile graphics, and one way to do that is to empower students to be the creators of their own graphics instead of passive recipients of graphics prepared by others. So before we get started, Amy Campbell has a discussion board activity to share with you.
So our discussion board activity that we have a QR code that is on the screen that you can snap a picture of. And as long as you are signed into the Hive, you should be able to jump right into that, and already dropped into the chat so quickly is access to that link if you need to take it that way. The question is, what tools do your students use independently to create tactile graphics? So Karen, thank you. You walked us through the progression of different tools that can be used to support graphic literacy. And that you have shared that coming up next, we're going to be thinking about how do we put the students in the driver's seat of being more of an active role of making their graphics, but even just sitting from the perspective of whether the student is actively engaging with something that a teacher has put together or themselves, thinking about what tools are your students using to create those tactile graphics. We know from our interview that we had with Dan that he mentioned the Picture Maker was a product that he felt that was very easy to use and manipulate. It is very forgiving when you have mistakes. And if you recall from our webinar that we had the last 2 weeks ago, Jennifer Brooks, our outreach specialist, gave us this great application of talking about how the Picture Maker tool was used for an orientation mobility lesson to talk about for a student to be able to show understanding of the route that this student would take from home to getting to school. So those were 2 examples. I know that we have also put in, what about using the Draftsman tool from APH? We know that we can make things by hand, whether it's from wiki sticks, foam stickers, the carousel of texture papers in order to make textured maps. So those are some things that are popping up into the discussion about things that your students are actively using and touching when interacting with tactile graphics. So it's just some things to be thinking about. I know that while that conversation is populating for us over in the discussion board, I know I can throw the ball back over to you, Karen, because you have more that you're going to be able to share with us having to do with putting that student better in that driver's seat of creating those things and, what should students be using in order to do that? So we're ready to learn more.
Okay, thanks, Amy. Thanks for mentioning some of those tools as well that we'll encounter in these slides coming up. So why should students create tactile graphics? In doing so, students learn to be active versus passive participants in the design of their own maps, graphs, diagrams, and artwork. While creating graphics, students build creative thinking and decision-making skills. They learn to make independent choices and design according to their own tactile preferences. They learn to identify and track different types of lines and outlines of shapes, and they will also develop an understanding of spatial orientation. Creating graphics also jumpstarts the student's symbolic understanding. For example, when the student independently creates a drawing of a familiar object on their own, they will recognize that the drawing cannot fully capture all of the features of the object. It's only a representation. Okay, just to note that all of the products covered in the next few slides will be listed in the resource list document associated with this webinar. So let's start with QuickDraw paper. We've already heard about that. So QuickDraw paper is essentially, it's a sheet of compressed sponge that reacts quickly to water-based drawing tools, including off-the-shelf commercial markers. As the student draws on the QuickDraw paper, their tactile drawing raises instantly. And in this photo, a young child has traced their hand to create a tactile drawing of a turkey. The benefit of QuickDraw paper is that it permits both a tactile and colorful outcome. Color by texture marking mats can be placed underneath a raised line coloring page to transfer and add interesting textures such as wavy, bumpy, rough, and striped. And this photo shows a coloring page of a sailboat with different textures added to the sails and hull of the boat. A wavy texture is added for the water. The durable coloring mats can also be used to transfer textures into clay or Play-Doh. Additionally, heavy gauge aluminum diagramming foil, and this is a product that we do still include in the Tactile Graphics kit, can be used to transfer textures using the textured coloring mats. So you merely place the foil sheet on top of the selected texture mat that you want. And in this photo, a zigzag texture is transferred to the foil sheet using a wooden sculpting tool. The Tactile Doodle is used in combination with tactile drawing film, an especially designed non-roll stylus that is small and easy to handle by young children. As a picture is drawn on the film, it raises instantly. The drawn lines blush white against a black rubber padding and gives a chalkboard appearance that can assist dual readers. It's very easy to use and great for spur-of-the-moment graphics within the classroom. A similar, more sophisticated tactile drawing board for older students is called the Draftsman. The Carousel of Textures kits 1 and 2 provide a wide array of textured shapes and sheets that can be used for collage graphics and open-ended art activities. The sheets range from soft foam and felt material with adhesive backing to translucent vinyl sheets in a variety of unique textures such as brick, bumpy, zigzag, bubble, and rough sandpaper. Although originally designed as an O&M tool for mapping purposes, the Picture Maker Kit can be used directly by the student as an interactive tactile drawing board, a tool for demonstrating their understanding of a variety of spatial concepts, and for creating tactile mazes and games. Because it resembles a conventional slate and stylus design, The tactile graphic line slate can be used with a two-ended stylus by students to tool different types of embossed line paths. The slate can be used in combination with a variety of substrates, including standard Braille paper, heavy gauge foil, vinyl, and tactile drawing film. Graphic art tape is available in 3 different widths. The tape has a crepe texture and can be used to embellish and construct a variety of tactile maps, graphs, and more. Graph benders provide flexible strips in 2 different colors and in contrasting textures. It also provides a variety of point symbols, including triangles, circles, and squares. Sensible Strips is a coming soon APH product that provides a variety of line, border, texture, and shape strips, all adhesive backed. In the lower photo, a variety of border strips were used by a student to independently create a drawing of a house. Fill and Pill tactile stickers offer common point symbols, alphabet letters, and Braille numbers that students can use to apply to their own graphics. Customized Braille labels can be created using Brailleable labels and sheets and applied to created graphics as well. So to end, other materials for creating graphics include Perkins Brailler, Poppe fabric paint, modeling clay and Play-Doh, cork or rubber board with pens and rubber bands, magnetic shapes, and a variety of craft materials including yarn, string, ribbon, sandpaper, craft foam, adhesive shapes, and textured paper. So thank you for your time, and I'm going to turn it back over to Amy Campbell, who will share some new and exciting tactile graphic resources with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Karen. If you were with us at the very beginning, I had mentioned that we had some new exciting things that we are able to share with you today. So if you have been with us from the beginning on this journey of tactile learning, you might be especially ready to have access to a new tangible resource that will help equip you in making decisions for your students. And I'm excited to be with our team here to be able to share that the outreach team, along with product managers, have been really hard and diligent at work for the past several months, developing a resource which helps bring together all the details from the 4-part webinar series that we are having. So today is part 3 of 4. So whether you want to identify those gaps in tactile learning, as Jenny had mentioned, when it came time to progress monitoring and evaluation, or maybe you need to determine which target skill or group of skills you want to incorporate into instruction. So whether we're talking about instruction or IEP goal related, we want to be able to share with you a new resource called Foundations for Tactile Literacy, and that this is now available. And because you're here with us on the webinar, you can be the very first in order to hear about it. So we are going to have Erin Weaver, one of our outreach specialists, come in and share with us a little bit about the tactile skills progression matrix.
Welcome. My name is Erin Weaver. I am the outreach specialist for the Northeast region here at the American Printing House. I am excited to share with you a new resource called Foundations for Tactile Literacy, a reference tool for the tactile journey, emergent to advanced skills. This short video will provide you with a rationale for the development of this resource, suggestions for use, and an overview of the document layout. Over the past 5 to 10 years, research validates that written communication has become increasingly image dependent. Living in a visually rich environment where students are experiencing a barrage of graphics throughout their day brings the importance of tactile literacy to the forefront. Students with visual impairments must develop the ability to decode information presented as a graphic. It is an essential component of literacy. This document defines the skills and concepts of tactile learning, provides examples, and links products to skills and concepts. The Foundation for Tactile Literacy tool can be used in a variety of ways to enhance your instructional practice. It can be used as a checklist, an informal assessment tool, or as a source of data when conducting a learning media assessment. This tool can also be used to assist in formulating present levels of performance for an individualized education plan, writing IEP goals, and collecting data for progress monitoring. A final suggestion is to use the tool as a means of identifying products to develop activities and concrete educational strategies for teaching tactile learning. At the beginning of the document, you will find the table of contents, preface, and an accessible graphic overview of the emergent, basic, and advanced tactile skills and concepts. You will find 3 skill tables in the middle section of the document: emergent, basic, and advanced tactile skills. Each table consists of 3 columns. The first and second columns list the tactile skills and their definitions respectively. In the third column, you will find examples of what each skill may look like. This is the essence of the document. I would also like to point out 2 icons which you will find in the tables. The first icon is a picture of a finger pointing to a dot. This icon denotes the representation of a haptic skill. Haptic skills are those which refer to the sense of touch. The second icon can be found in the middle column of the table. It is a number with a small circle drawn around it. The number in the circle corresponds with research articles found on the last page of this document. One of my favorite features of this tool is the data collection sheets, which are located immediately following the skills tables. The data collection sheets list the emergent, basic, and advanced tactile skills in the same order found in the skills tables. Below each skill name, you will find room to enter anecdotal notes. Along the right side of each data collection sheet, you will find 3 columns to capture the date and indicate the level of skill mastery by entering a symbol of your choosing. For example, a plus sign or a check mark could indicate mastery. The last section of this document focuses on resources. Here you will find links to APH products which foster tactile skill development and the Foundations for Tactile Literacy discussion board, a platform which empowers users to ask questions, share thoughts, and consider new points of view. Information regarding the 4-part Access Academy webinar series, Tactile Graphics Literacy for Students with Visual Impairments, and research articles cited wrap up the document. It is imperative that students with visual impairments are provided with intentional opportunities to develop the skills and concepts necessary to gather information tactually and become efficient tactile learners. The Foundations to Tactile Literacy document will be a great addition to your toolkit as you navigate your way through the world of tactile literacy. On behalf of our outreach team, I would like to thank Karen Poppe, who began work in the domain of tactile skills many years ago. Karen's efforts resulted in the production of the Tactile Literacy Matrix. This robust foundation allowed us to springboard into planning for and developing the Foundations for Tactile Literacy, a reference tool for the tactile journey, emergent to advanced skills.
So as Erin was mentioning, whether you are in the evaluation stage, whether you are providing instruction, monitoring progress, you have something extra in your toolbox now as a resource. Angela had dropped into the chat window for you previously, and we'll drop it in again. The link where you can get access to this new resource. And if you snag it now, I promise you, you will be of the very, very first individuals that will have been able to access it. It's a fully accessible document. It also tracks that progress of whether we're looking at skills that are at the beginner level all the way through the advanced. So as we anticipate the launch of the coming of the Monarch, which is the multi-line display Braille device. This is our rationale for our webinar series, is to help show all of the foundation skills that will place your students in the right position in order to be successful for those even more advanced skills. And so here we have this tool that you have access to that can help you on that journey as you get your students ready, prepared in order to be able to use this device. So I think I'm ready to bounce things back over to either Karen or Jenny, where we're talking about further APH Access Academy and the Hive, or was that me? I've lost track.
I would just like to thank everybody so much for joining us today. It's been such a pleasure to talk with all of you. At the end of our presentation here, we've got links to the APH Access Academy and the Hive, which we hope that you'll make great use of. They're wonderful resources and should be a great benefit for teaching tactile graphics learning. We've also included references. We had many articles that we used, wonderful information, research that has been done to back up everything that we've talked about today. We hope that you'll also take advantage of these. And I will turn it back once more to Amy to talk about our fourth webinar.
So we do, as we mentioned, this 4-part webinar series, our last one, which airs on December the 12th. It's the Monarch Tactile Access to Digital Learning. I know that you will not want to miss out on that. It is from 3 to 4:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Again, we will drop into the chat window. Angela has been so quick with that so that you can register for this webinar even right now to ensure that you've got that calendar invite already set for you that you can anticipate. You can come back and join us for that. And again, if you come back also with that new resource that is the Tactile Skills Foundation, you will see how we get into those advanced skills which layer into what we are learning and using with the device of the Monarch specifically.